So thank you everyone for attending the webinar. Welcome to Retrofit Talks. I'm Laura Broderick, the Commercial Partnerships Manager at the Building Centre, and I'll be introducing today's session, It Takes a Community, and this session's all about the Netherfield Estate. But before we get started and hear today's presentation, I just want to tell you a little bit about the online talk series, which is part of Retrofit 23 at the Building Centre. It's designed to connect professionals and discuss residential retrofit. We're here to showcase the latest research and projects from architectural practice, offering valuable case studies and solutions for retrofitting homes. Our guest speakers present their projects, and then there's a Q&A with you, our webinar audience. Today's talk is our 6th Retrofit Talks event, and if you missed the past sessions, you can catch up with the recordings via our website, that's thebuildingcentre.co.uk, or our YouTube channel. But back to today. Lizzy Westmacott, Associate Director and Regional Head of Sustainability for ECD Architects, will be presenting and hosting today's session. Lizzy has been a great help with the Retrofit 23 programme, bringing her retrofit expertise to support the exhibition and also these talks. We're delighted that Lizzy can speak about Netherfield project today, which is featured in the Retrofit exhibition, with ECD and Keynes both kindly sponsoring the show. For this session, Lizzy has invited 4 panellists to join her, all of whom have played an important part in the delivery and community aspect of the Netherfield retrofit. To start, Lizzy will give an overview of the project, and then she will invite her guests in turn to speak with her and share their involvement and thoughts on the project with us as the audience for about 5 minutes each. There will then be a Q&A with the full panel. I'm sure you're going to have lots of questions for the panelists, so please use the chat function to leave those questions, and I'll address them after the conversation in about 25 minutes time. I kindly request that you focus your questions and avoid making statements. This is much easier for me to moderate and for Lizzy and her colleagues to answer. Also, if you know the name of the panelist who you would like to answer it, please make sure you type that in the box. Now over to Lizzy for today's presentation. Thank you, Lizzy.
Hi, thank you all for joining us. I'm just going to share my screen. Hopefully you can all see my screen. Hopefully someone will let me know if you can't. Great. So I'm going to be talking about the estate at Netherfield, where we're going to be where we are carrying out some retrofitting work. But to start talking more generally, there are around 28 million homes in the UK, and most of them need to be retrofitted if we're going to avoid catastrophic climate change. This retrofitting is also going to make those homes more comfortable and affordable for the people in them to heat. But it doesn't always seem like the most exciting or glamorous thing to do. I think I can safely say that when I was studying to become an architect, an ambition to retrofit buildings wasn't why most of us were there. And it's often more complicated than building something new. There are all the messy realities of existing construction, strange maintenance choices that have happened over time, a mix of ownerships and people who live interesting and varied lives in these homes. But we want to tell you that these complexities are also what makes retrofitting homes a really satisfying thing to do. You get to meet the actual people who live in the homes that you're helping to improve. You get a really good understanding of a range of building techniques, and a far better understanding of how energy is used in buildings. And what I really want is that we inspire everyone at this webinar to get involved in retrofitting homes too, because as I said, there are 28 million homes in the UK and most of them need retrofitting, and none of us want to do that by ourselves. So it's important that we're working together, and we'll talk a bit more about that today, but also that everybody gets involved. Otherwise, it's going to kill the few of us who are doing it. So today we're going to focus on the roles and the people involved in getting a retrofit to happen. So I'm first going to briefly talk you through the project, but we won't be focusing so much on the technical details. Instead, I'll be talking to some of the people involved in getting the project underway. So I'm hoping you can all see my screen, but it's doing something strange that it didn't do before. So hopefully someone will let me know if they can't see my screen.
We're fine, Lizzy.
I'm fine. Thank you very much. Great. So I'm your host. And after the introduction, I'll be talking to Peter, and Mike from Mears Group, who are the contractors who are carrying out the retrofit at Netherfield, and also to Ashley from Keegan's, is working as the retrofit assessor and coordinator, and to Marion, who's one of the retrofit designers and indeed my colleague. So I'll let them introduce themselves properly when we get there. But first, I'll give you a bit of a background about the estate and what we're working on there. So, doesn't it look exciting, but also quite old photos? The estate was commissioned by the Milton Keynes Development Corporation and was one of the earliest estates that formed the new town that is now Milton Keynes. So it was built in the early to mid 1970s. And as you can see from the photos, there's a real rigor to the repetitiveness of the design. And actually the roof level is consistent across the whole estate, with the number of stories varying with the topography. So the roof level stays the same, but the base of the building varies in height, dependent on the topography. And from that, you get homes that range in height from bungalows to 3-story houses. So with this real sort of rigor to the design, someone really, the designers really meant something in what they were doing. And it's got relatively generously sized rooms and storage space and green spaces between the homes. This estate was a new and exciting way to live. In spite of the relatively industrial external finishes, there are actually timber framed houses behind that could be constructed quickly with semi-skilled labour. Had some benefits at the time. In the long run, that's led to some issues. So nearly 50 years later, the buildings aren't doing quite so well. And we've got varied ownership across the estate. Some of them have been bought under the right to buy. Some of them are owned by housing associations. Many of them are still owned by Milton Keynes. So people have done different things to the homes that they own themselves. So you get, rather than this real rigor and repetitiveness, there's quite a lot of variation now across the estate and what things look like from the outside. The homes were initially built with no insulation at all in the timber frame. Some have had some thermal upgrades over time, and that's made a difference, but it's not made enough difference. And you can see on the bottom left there some mold in one of the homes. The photo in the middle at the bottom is not the condition anyone was living in. That's when we started to open up one of the void properties to understand how it's constructed. But you can see the timber frame there, and there's nothing really in there. So there's nothing keeping people warm as the homes were originally built. So there have been upgrades over time, but it's really hard to keep something nice for all of this time, particularly when it's got these intrinsic issues with the original build that lead to problems. However, there is still a really strong sense of the community on the estate. And so it's really important to the people living there that they actually get to carry on living there because they like their neighbours, they like living there. So the best thing we can do is retrofit. Milton Keynes appointed the team that we'll be talking to. So they appointed Mears first as the contractor, and Mears have appointed Keegan's as the retrofit assessors and coordinators, and ECD as the retrofit designers. In total, we'll be retrofitting over 600 homes on the estate, and the work's part funded by the Social Housing Decarbonisation Fund, which is some central government money to help retrofit social housing. And that kind of sets the level to which we can retrofit. But broadly, from what you can see in the image here, we'll be putting insulation all the way around the outside, so the walls and the roof will be insulated, making sure we've got that continuity of insulation, and also improving the air tightness. Alongside that improvement in air tightness, we'll be making sure that the homes are well ventilated. We've got a new layer of cladding on the outside of that new insulation. So it's smartening up the estate, but we've also spoken to residents about what that cladding should be and how it should fit in with what's there at the moment. And in some cases, where necessary, we've reduced what were 5 windows in a row down to 3 windows, because several of the homes had issues with overheating. So we sought to mitigate that in the work we're doing. So retrofitting is about insulation and keeping people warm, but it's also about things like overheating and particularly dealing with future climate and how we're going to adapt for that. There's an opportunity as we're doing this work to meet any potential future problems as well as current problems. So we held several meetings with residents, ensuring that they know what's being planned for their homes, but also why it's being planned for their homes. What's the point of all of this? It's going to be disruptive, but we want to make sure they understand why it's happening. And also giving them input into the eventual finishes of their home. What's the outside of your home going to look like? And how does that make the estate feel as a whole? It's not just about your home, it's also about the whole estate. And I think that's been a really positive experience for everyone involved. Had lots of people come down to this event and to a sort of fun day on the estate that Milton Keynes organised, and lots of feedback from people, and indeed some enthusiastic comments in support of the planning application. And we've now finally started on site, which is great news. So there's lots going on. It's just a few pilot properties so far, but we'll be ramping that up soon. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen and I'm going to speak to some of the people involved. First, Peter, perhaps you could put your camera and sound on and we'll have a little chat. Hi, thank you. First up, perhaps you could just tell everyone kind of what your role is, but also what that means you're doing on a daily basis to do with Netherfield.
So my role is as Managing Director of MEARS nationally. However, I'm also a resident in Milton Keynes. I'm sat in an office in Milton Keynes right now. And so I think I've got that balance between, I guess, what retrofit means nationally to MEARS and to clients that we're delivering to and for. However, being a local resident, there is, I guess you'd expect a slightly different connection and a responsibility for me in terms of delivering within this community. I think my role is kind of an overarching role that glues all the different aspects together. It's from inception and how MEARS were going to approach retrofit, how we were going to, I guess, tackle client challenges, and needing to select a platform to really showcase our experience and our approach on. And we did that through SHDF Wave 1 and Wave 2 bids around the Netherfield project. And I think that community was crying out for deep retrofit in terms of the thermal efficiency of those properties, but also properties that were probably only designed to last for 30 to 40 years and 55 years later were still standing and in need of some TLC. So I think from my point of view, it's very much a broad knowledge rather than a detailed knowledge in any particular area. And it's being able to link the client and the community challenges and needs and glue all of that together.
So I guess your role in the project's probably changed from the inception of the project to what you're doing now. Can you speak to us a bit about kind of the different people that you've engaged with on the way through?
I think for myself as well, it started with a kind of an objective with regards to achieving a EPCC in terms of improving the I guess the thermal efficiency of the properties and a view on kind of net zero moving forward. Started with very much a sort of a data-driven type approach, and then a huge learning curve for me as well as everybody else with regards to PAS and the different I guess roles and coordinators and materials and supply chain and lack of supply chain and knowledge and labour in the marketplace. So it's evolved through that stage, and I think the thing that struck me most and something that we're talking about here is that we can very much get wrapped up in the technicalities and the target or the objective from a data point of view and talk about these things as assets, but they are fundamentally homes. And the engagement with the community and sharing with the community what we're doing, why, how long it will take, what the outcomes are going to be, and listening to the community about the practicalities of living in these homes and taking that on board within design. It opens up a whole new world, and I think there's a massive piece around awareness of how people live in these homes and how these homes perform for them. I think something that was a bit of a sad realization along this journey and the amount of time that it's taken and still will take is the cost of utility bills during that time. And we started at the onset with looking at putting pounds and pence back into residents' pockets, and now really we're mitigating the impact of the pounds and pence that are inevitably coming out of pockets, and with a cost of living crisis that we're all in. So that the journey's changed, but it's been a huge and fantastic learning curve for me and everybody else that's been involved.
And can you tell us what you're looking forward to most on this project?
Genuinely something to be proud of. I think the difference for me compared to other contracts that we work with or people that are associated with this, even potentially yourself, Lizzy, that don't live in the community, is that, you know, I've got to walk around the shopping centre afterwards, and I think genuinely it's somewhere where a place we should all be, where in terms of decisions that we make and the outcomes that we deliver, that we have to be something that we're all proud of when we walk away at the end of it. And I think for me, there's that additional piece that we're going to continue working with these communities with repairs and maintenance, voids, gas servicing, and I'm going to continue to live in the community, and you know, I'm quite prominent with regards to these conversations, and I'm going to walk around the supermarket and the shopping centre afterwards, and it has to be something that I can say, yeah, we did a great job.
Great, thank you so much. And particularly useful to have speak to someone who lives nearby and sort of understands the Milton Keynes context. And most of us don't often get the opportunity to work so close to home. So I think it's a really nice thing to do. Mike, perhaps we can switch over to you now and we'll have a bit of a chat. Hi.
Hi.
If you could just sort of briefly introduce your role, and again, your role's probably changed a bit throughout the course of the project, but if you could sort of give us an idea of, like, on a typical day, what you get up to, that would be really useful.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Lizzy. So I'm Mike McGowan. I'm head of carbon reduction solutions for MEAs. So ultimately what that means is that I help our clients and partners to come up with retrofit strategies for their housing portfolios to help them achieve and attain as much government funding as possible to offset the capital requirements, to help ensure that those programmes dovetail neatly into existing asset management contracts, and then also to work with colleagues such as Peter to deliver aspirationally best-in-class retrofit programmes for our clients and the communities in which we work. I've been involved in this project since about March 2021. It was one of the very first projects that I got involved in. So literally, you know, not far behind Peter in terms of involvement. Literally started it with a blank canvas, the client advising us that they wanted to invest in this community with almost like retrofit at the heart of transforming the estate. Blank canvas in terms of concept, blank canvas in terms of scope. Started out with a handful of retrofit assessments and then shaping the strategy from then. As you said that, and given the timeline which I've just outlined then, the change in my role within that period has been quite large, from, you know, coming up with the concept, helped to shape that strategy, writing the initial papers to sort of demonstrate to the client that what we believed could be done was achievable, which then led to us submitting an application for SHDF Wave 1 back in November 2021, which we secured the funding for that spring. Since then, I've worked alongside Keegan's and ECD to shape our approach, or to steward our approach really, in terms of past 2035, ensuring that, you know, we and you will hear more from the rest of the team in terms of that process, but it has really just been ensuring that the process is followed as outlined within the guidance, and that we've got the right skills within our project team, and then working right the way through that to coming up with specifications with yourselves, supporting the procurement strategy, and now that we have thankfully opened up those first initial pilots, which will obviously then inform the remainder of our programme, I will then support the team and our clients as well to go through the remainder of this journey.
So I'm guessing that in all of that, it sounds like you have probably quite a lot of meetings with people. I guess you go to site from time to time, and it sounds like you do quite a bit of writing for bids and so on. I was wondering which element of that do you enjoy the most? You've got to pick one.
Speaking to the community. speaking to the community, because that's when you actually feel the impact of what you're doing. I remember the very first time I went out to Netherfield. It was a dark, gloomy day. The streetscape was not, you know, the most appealing at that time. It was dark, cloud, you know, it was early morning, drizzle in the air. You know, this area, it requires investment, and that's why Milton Keynes City Council prioritised this estate. The first few surveys that we had on that day, we had access challenges, we had some refusals, and at first I was thinking this is going to be a challenge. This, as the day went on, we spoke to a number of the residents, and I probably spent an hour or two just chatting to residents who we were completing the surveys, whose homes we were accessing those days, and even at that point on the very first visit, I got a feel for that pride in the community, for people who've been long-standing residents, and hearing the time that they've spent on the estate, talking about the sort of different iterations of change, whether that be within the community, the aesthetics of the estate, their real desire to reinstate that pride of place within the community. That was a sort of real eye-opener for me, and I come back sort of really enthused after that initial visit. From there, what that's flowed into is obviously you showed some pictures before around the resident engagement sessions that we've completed, and again, Peter and I leading some of those sessions with the parish councillors, etc. Just hearing the sheer passion that the residents in the area have for that area, and the sheer desire that they have to see this project succeed. That's been the best thing for us, because sometimes when you're sat behind a computer screen, you can lose touch with the positive impact of the work that you're doing. And I think that sort of affirmation that all of the hours that we're spending to make these things come to light are actually are very much worth it for those residents.
Great, thank you. And finally, is there anything that's really surprised you on this project?
Yes, the time that it's taken us to get to site. I think we went into this as a project team with our eyes open around the complexities of multiple different barriers within this journey. So PAS 2035, not barriers, but the process that you need to. So PAS 2035 and the elongated chain of activities that are required to sort of get us to a best in practice project. Planning, resident engagement, heritage aspects. I think just the sheer time of you can put all of these items on a risk register, and you can put a mitigation strategy in place for all of them. But I think one of the things you don't always consider when you are putting a strategy together such as that is the compound impact of two of those things happening at the same time, and what happens if planning then impacts on something else, and you have this sort of multiplication factor and amplification factor of multiple risks coming together at the same time, and then the elongation of that. So yeah, just the sheer time it's taken to get us to where we need to be has probably been the biggest eye-opener, and something that we've really been able to learn from and weave into our planning for our SHTFWay 2.1 programmes.
Great, well, good luck with the rest of this, and indeed the rest of your other programmes. We're going to speak to Ashley now. And so perhaps you could turn your camera on and so on. Thank you. So Ashley has been working as one of the retrofit assessors and retrofit coordinators on this project. So firstly, Ashley, can you very briefly describe, and I know it's hard to describe briefly, but what those two things mean?
Yes, so hi everyone, I'm Ashley Sims, associate at Keegan's. So as Lizzie mentioned, I'm a retrofit assessor and coordinator. The assessors, I'll start with that first. So basically, it's just to give you a quick overview of what we do as an assessor. We visit each property, and that is every property. We look at the condition within the property. So we try to identify if there's any sort of structural issues, any damp and mold. We'll do a room by room assessment. That all gets put into a report format. And from there, we will basically come up with a range of proposed measures that can mitigate or get rid of those issues that have been identified. Within the assessment stage as well, we'll generally have a conversation with the residents about how the home's used, so we can understand the energy impact. So we'll ask them sort of like how often are you using washing machines? Are you drying clothes within the home? So we can get a picture about how that property is being used. So that's sort of the assessment stage, really. The visit to the property, then we will come back and do some SAP analysis. So that's sort of looking at the energy impact of that property and what we need to do to get to a much less heat demand, or how we improve the efficiency of that property. So it obviously reduces the bills and the carbon impact for that property. So that's pretty much the assessment. We then move on to what we call the coordination. And this is quite a lengthy process. We're involved really from inception to completion. So the first thing we do is look at the risk path for a property, and that throws out a range of standards that we need to adhere to in terms of documentation, additional surveys that might be required. That's the first step. The next step is to carry out a range of improvement models within a piece of software that tells you, if we do loft insulation, for example, you'll be at this energy rating, your proposed fuel savings will be X amount. And then that information is passed over to ECD as designers for them to produce a specification and advise what sort of thermal efficiency we need for a particular product. Following that, we then move on to the sort of work in progress. So we'll be out on site inspecting the works, making sure all the documentation's being produced, so we're fully compliant for the funding. And then finally, it's sort of the sign off and release of all that documentation to DESNZ, which is the funding provider.
So you've got this going to visit everybody, and then you've got a bunch of stuff in an office, and then you've got going to visit site, and then you've got some more stuff in an office. Which is your favourite bit?
Being out on site, I would say.
Cool.
And people, yeah.
I was wondering, are there sort of key things, like key moments in your career or indeed in your life, that kind of led you to working on this kind of project as opposed to other sorts of building projects, or indeed a totally different career?
No, I think I've always been involved in energy efficiency. So I've got 14 years now of being an energy assessor. So I'm quite passionate about obviously making those homes more comfortable for the residents, keeping the fuel bills as low as possible, reducing the carbon impact. So yeah, I'm quite passionate about that, Lizzie.
And I was going to say, are there particular skills then that you need to do this, presumably, and training that's got you here?
Yes, so there's various qualifications you've got to obtain to be able to do this role. So from an energy assessor point of view, you've got a sort of a 5-day course now, I believe they offer. The retrofit coordination is quite a lengthy program, but yeah, it's definitely doable for most people. And you learn on the job as well. I mean, this is not a set in stone process that everyone knows how to do this. Even when you're qualified, you sort of learn as you're going. And obviously we've got quite a lot of experience now, so that definitely helps.
Cool. And finally, what have you found most interesting on this particular project?
I think for me, it's being on site and engaging with the residents. I've done quite a lot of assessments, and I find the community's been very welcoming. I enjoy being on site and doing the assessments, and I'm still doing them now, actually. So yeah, that's the most enjoyable bit for me. And obviously the outcome of this, being proud, like someone else has mentioned, that we've done a good job. That's the point we want to be at.
Cool, nice. Right, and now we're going to move on to speak to Marion. Hi, Marion.
Hello.
So Marion is my colleague at ECD and is one of the retrofit designers who's been working on this project. So Marion, I'll let you introduce yourself a bit, but also if you could sort of talk to us, like, on a daily basis, you come into the office and you sit down, and what happens?
Yes, I'm Marion Gray. I'm a senior architect at ECD Architects and also a qualified passive house designer. And my day is a mixture of everything, really, particularly this type of project. There's just so many aspects to it. So with the unusual design of the houses, quite unique in its way, there isn't another estate built exactly the same way as this one. So the early part of the project was the investigation, the detective work, just to find out the history and the background. And that was my very exciting part of the project at the beginning, to come to the office and say, what can I find out about Netherfield today? And then to go there, we had early site visits to see empty properties and try and unpick and unravel how they were built in the first place and what has changed, and start to get a feel for it. So at the moment, my day is when we go to site, we're looking at the first properties that are being built at the moment and doing close inspections, speaking to the installers, understanding how they get on with putting everything together. And at the same time, back in the office working on the planning application for the second part of the works, which is going to roll on after the SHDF Wave 1 is completed.
Cool. And I was going to ask for you as well, are there any have you always worked on kind of retrofit projects, or have you done other sorts of architecture before? Or is there any sort of key moment that you'd like, I've got to do this instead?
Yeah, well, I'd worked on a whole variety of different building types, and the thing we'd always worked on getting solar panels, PV panels, heat pumps, good insulation. But the key thing for me was really wanting to understand more about building physics, building science, and know, as an architect, if I make the shape of this building slightly different, or I change the overhang of the roof or the size of the windows, what is that actually doing in terms of how the building's going to run and how much energy it uses, and which of course applies to every building type. And so that led me to do the Passive House Designer course, which has brought me on to doing retrofits and all types of low energy building design. But yeah, I think being able to really understand without relying completely on another consultant to tell me what the effect of one little change would be, it was really the key thing.
Cool. And finally, how many people, just really quick guess, do you reckon you've met on this project in total?
That is a very good question. I think it's I'd say maybe about 100 and 150, maybe a bit more. We've met a lot of the residents. We've had 2 open drop-in meetings for residents to come along and meet us and talk about the proposals, which were extremely well attended. And just to get to speak to people and say, right, well, I've been drawing your house last week, and it makes such a difference to the day-to-day work that we're doing. To say, well, actually, I know we've met the people who live here, and that's that funny house that's got the slightly different variation from all the other ones. And yeah, so being able to meet so many people just makes a big difference to how you think about the project when you're sitting doing a whole lot of details or a whole lot of things in a spreadsheet, because it makes it more genuinely real. Nice.
Great. Well, I think we'll leave it there. So we've got a little bit of time for a few questions, if there are any. Hi, Laura.
Hi. I was just going to ask all the panelists to come back on camera so that we can have the Q&A with everyone together. Brilliant. Well, firstly, thank you, Lizzy, and thank you to everybody who's presented. I know, Lizzy, you started off saying you wanted to inspire people to understand a whole project, not just an individual profession or an individual aspect of delivery. And I think you've done that, having this range of speakers join you today. So it was brilliant to hear from all of you. And definitely you all touched upon enjoying the community engagement aspect, which I know sometimes gets negative press, you know, everyone's different needs and wants, and how do you find that balance for everyone? But it seems to be that you were embracing that and working through it in a really positive way. So just in terms of questions, we had 2 that came through quite early on that I know, Mike, you've offered to answer. So let's start with those ones. So Mike, you had a question in about the fact that this is a pilot project, and what is the plan to retrofit all of the properties? And if you're not doing that, how do you deal with thermal bridging to neighbouring properties? So do you want to start with that, Mike, and then I'll give you your second question after that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think just I tried to sort of tease it out partially within the overview before, but what we're doing at the moment is we're targeting 3 pilots across the key archetypes, rather than just sort of rolling straight into the programme. We've decided to open up in that manner so that we can actually sort of understand the, if you will, the peaks and troughs in terms of the construction phase or the retrofit phase. Obviously, what is often designed or surveyed and conceptually thought to be the case can be quite dramatically different once we open up. So rather than just sort of running straight into the program, what we found really beneficial on the other projects that we've worked on together thus far is that when we open up some archetypal pilots, we actually learn some lessons within that. We can make some tweaks to the design, make some tweaks to the strategy that we've put in place, really, because ultimately, we are, as has been touched on, we're working in people's homes. If we find some sort of curious detail, once we actually start smoking up works and we have to stop the project for weeks and weeks on end, the impact on residents within that period is quite extensive and impactful. So we've gone with a slow start, but as Lizzy touched on within her opening overview, it is going to be an extremely accelerated program to achieve the around 304 retrofits within wave 1 and then rolling into completing the rest of the estate under SHTF Wave 2.1.
Great, excellent. And then to continue with you, Mike, just because you've been so good to volunteer, what was the most effective format for the resident engagement sessions?
100% the face-to-face sessions, absolutely 100%. I think we were very fortunate, as I mentioned before, to have the opportunity to engage with some of the parish councillors in advance to having the open days on the estate. What that enables us to do is to go through the design concepts, listen again to people who are so passionate about the area in which they are both living and working. It helped us to actually, I think, shape our messaging when we had the resident engagement sessions en masse with the broader community. We found by taking we found that different people receive information in different ways. I think it's probably a very basic statement to make, but sometimes as I said before, you get that sort of used to talking in a certain way and using specific terms and maybe even getting into sort of the jargon. Is that what we actually found is that we needed to actually make it a bit more visual. So our colleagues over at ECD, our partners over at ECD, come up with some really powerful sort of storyboards which showed the sort of almost a timeline of the project from inception. What did the estate used to look like? What's the process that we followed? What's going to be the potential product that we're going to deliver for the residents on the estate? But also we managed to bring in some samples as well of different materials, different sort of, things like there's a very specific fin detail which is on the property. And we were able to sort of bring some of the external wall insulation products along with us, and just bringing that sort of visual aid and then being able to talk around that. It really gave us that buy-in. We also gave the residents, or Milton Keynes City Council rather, gave their residents the opportunity to actually vote on some of the, if you will, the colour palettes that were going to be used within the retrofit. So what that also helped us to do, it gave us that sort of two-way communication with the residents so that they felt that they were part of this process, and we and Milton Keynes City Council weren't just doing this to them. And I think that sort of participation piece within it, it actually sort of reaped its rewards in the planning process, because we had many notes of support from the community based upon the intensive nature of that communication that we did up front.
Yeah, excellent. Thank you, Mike. And there's a question that builds on that from Brid, which was about the challenges of community engagement and how you navigated that. I mean, maybe someone else would like to continue saying a bit more about the community engagement process with some of the challenges rather than necessarily some of the successes. Who would like to maybe talk about that?
I'm happy to pick that up.
Brilliant, thanks.
I think let's be honest, we started from a place of I guess distrust and a community that felt that they'd been let down or left behind, and there were many reasons why that had taken place. So was this a false dawn? Was this really going to happen? Are you going to deliver this with the community or to the community? Are you going to listen? And I think in terms of the face-to-face engagement, it's too easy to get wrapped up around the design technicalities and how an asset's going to perform, rather than actually the practicalities of how that's going to work as someone's home. And we had this element that's been referenced around the fins and the design. It was this quirky architectural element that had been added, and how we're going to deal with that, and what was it fixed to. And we were talking around that as a technical piece. Actually, when you listen to the residents, the most important thing that they wanted to know is what's coming off and what's going back there, because it's just a ladder for rodents to get into our properties and into our loft. And it was a real sticking point for the community in terms of what was going to happen with that specific aspect of the design. We would never ever have envisaged that. And I think also, even with sort of air management and ventilation, we put in sort of Ventaxia, Revive 5, fans, etc. in. There was a TikTok video that was created by a resident on the estate that went absolutely viral, that said, I've had one of these things fitted. They're all going to be fitted to your homes. It's costing me £10 a day in electricity, and this is how you take the fuse out of the spur and stop it working. And we all know the impacts of that, and properties sweating and damper mold, and what we're about to do. And actually what we are able to do via these engagement sessions is demonstrate what that product does, what the benefits are, and through an actual calculator that's on the manufacturer's website, demonstrate that that would cost less than £2.50 a year to run. And actually things like Xboxes and Sky boxes on standby were consuming considerably more electricity. So we went through a whole resident awareness session in terms of, what does it cost to clean your washing at 20 degrees, 30 degrees, 40 degrees, 60 degrees? What does it cost to put a single pizza in the oven? Did you know your Skybox is costing you £55 a year on standby? And oh, by the way, these things that we're doing to your home, this is how they benefit you, and these are the savings that you're going to make to your utility bill. So I genuinely think that whole face-to-face engagement, that trust and rapport that you build, the ability to listen and shape a design and an outcome to something that not only we're proud of, but the community are proud of in terms of next generations, that is absolutely huge.
Brilliant. Thank you, Peter. So let's move on. Maybe Katrina, you could talk about, sorry, the question's from Katrina, sorry. Oh, I should not should be, oh, I'll start again. The question is from Katrina. What were the key factors and the decision making amongst the stakeholders to actually decide to retrofit rather than go down the demolition route? I mean, Lizzy, do you want to say, were you involved early doors?
I think probably Peter was the person who was most involved near the beginning. So
I do know. So interestingly, being a resident of Milton Keynes, when we first tendered to be involved in a contract with Milton Keynes at all, which was probably in 2014, there were 7 estates that were earmarked for regeneration. And anybody, including me, that lived locally, went into a dialogue session with the client and just reeled them off. They would be the worst kept secret in the world. But then what happened after that was that actually the community chose. And regardless of what we think about these assets, they are people's homes, and people love these homes, and they love the size of these homes, and they love the generations of communities that have been built. And their view was, if you think you're going to knock my house down, then I'll be chained to the front of it when the bulldozer turns up. And actually, we don't want to do that. We don't want these properties knocked down. We don't want to have our community dispersed while you do that and then reassembled. And actually, by I guess luck rather than judgment, SHDF and the funding became the enabler for deep retrofit and to do something to reinvigorate this community and deal with the challenges to the assets, but keeping that community together and allowing these people to keep those homes. So the honest answer is the community made the decision, which was a polar opposite to what was initially intended.
And you mentioned then, Peter, the funding coming through for the retrofit, and did that cover the engagement? Was there a specific budget for that community engagement, or did that have to be driven separately?
Part of that gets wrapped up into some of the ancillary costs. Part of it is wrapped up where we're fortunate enough that we've got an overarching contract with Milton Keynes that are delivering a number of other services. And part of it, to be honest, is part of the enabling, the stuff we do at risk with as me as ECD Keegans with our partners to allow these type of projects to happen. And wave 1 was 304 properties. Wave 2 completes the other circa 300 properties on that estate, but is much wider, and we'll be delivering retrofit at this moment in time to around 2,000 properties in Milton Keynes. So honestly, it's we've been fortunate in some parts, but the rest of it for me is investment in our time to get these things off the ground and get them up and running.
And for it to be successful, it's worth the investment. Yeah. Okay, maybe I'm just conscious of different voices coming in. So we've got a question about, could you say more on the extent to which the retrofit designs are standardized and whether you are generating economies of scale by rolling out a large number of similar upgrades? I mean, Marion or Ashley?
Yeah, I can answer that one. And so the Netherfield Estate is quite ideal in a way because there is a lot of repetition. It's long terraces. There are different heights of building, obviously bungalow, 2-story to 3-story, but the construction is largely similar. So yes, we're certainly able to take advantage of doing a set of details and common materials and products and so on, and apply the same principles against the different types. So yeah, it doesn't mean that there is a small number of details, because there are, I think there are sort of, if you count all the variations, sort of 17 different archetypes, and obviously the different heights. But yeah, it was one thing that works well, that we were able to use the same methods and designs across most of the archetypes.
Yeah, very helpful. Yeah, we'll maybe take a few final questions and then we will have to wrap up. One is about, are you in touch with any kind of similar retrofit projects across the UK or even wider Europe? And do you see any benefit to collaboration? Lizzy, go.
I think the first thing to say is that sort of, well, ECD, Keegans and Mears are working together on probably a few thousand retrofits now in different places, like, yes, a lot in Milton Keynes, but also in some other places. And then also ECD are working on other retrofit projects really all over the country. So I actually now work in our office in Glasgow. And I think in total, we're working on around 10,000 homes being retrofitted across the country. Some of them are, you know, on an estate like this, some of them are scattered all over the place, some of them are in a tower block. So kind of, and we're working with Keegans on a lot of those as well. So we're kind of internally collaborating quite a bit, I guess. And then on top of that, for example, one of the projects we're working on is an Energiesprong project. And I'm not going to go into describing that right now, but Energiesprong are an organization that are, or part of them is an organization that they're really trying to make sure that information is shared and anything that's learned on one project is shared with other projects, so that any innovation can be shared and picked up on other projects. So there's things like that, and particularly where we're doing Enefit projects, which is the sort of retrofit standard for Passive House. The Passive House Trust are also great at making sure that people are kind of sharing information. And then, you know, architects talk to other architects from time to time. It may surprise you to learn. And in fact, there's a few of them on this call now who are people I have worked with at different places and just talk to each other. So there's kind of formal collaboration, and there's less formal collaboration. But I'd say we know a fair amount of what's going on, and definitely, you know, learning from one project to the next, and making, actually, it's become quite a challenge even within our own company to make sure that we're learning from our own projects as we've grown, because there's so much retrofit to do now, making sure that everyone in the office knows what's going on. That in itself has become a challenge, but, you know, an enjoyable one, because you get to kind of go, I did this and it was great, or I did this and we could do it better next time, but you're still sharing and communicating.
Excellent. Thank you, Lizzy. And Ashley, this is actually a question from me. You mentioned you're still going into people's homes on the estate and doing work. I mean, have you noticed attitudes changing over time and over the process? Have you kind of...
Yeah, I mean, I've always had a sense of being on the estate. The residents have been quite open to the improvements. I don't think there's many I've come across where they've not been looking forward to it as such. The ones I've been doing most recently, again, they've been very engaging. They're open to us going in, doing the assessments. We're talking through the journey while we're there and what to expect. Yeah, no, it's been very good, and we've still got a couple more to finish off.
Excellent. Well, thank you all, and thank you everyone for asking questions. I think I got through most of them. So it's been a great session. I've really enjoyed it. So thank you to Lizzy, to Peter, to Mike, to Ashley, and to Marion for taking the time to do the webinar with us today. I believe if you've got any further questions, you can direct them to the ECD office. Their office email will be on their website. So if you want to keep in touch with the project, do that way. We have been recording the session, so we will publish it shortly on the Building Centre's events pages and on the YouTube channel. So if you want to watch back or share it with colleagues who've missed today, please do that. We have another Retrofit Talk next Tuesday lunchtime with Katie Marks from Citizens Design Bureau. So book on for that one. That's Tuesday the 11th, same time, 1 o'clock on the Tuesday. We also have in-person sessions. So if you are in London next week, we've actually got 2 sessions. We've got one on Wednesday about heritage properties and retrofit, and then another on the Thursday about overheating. And I know Lizzy mentioned within the retrofit here, you know, you're not just talking about the initial kind of energy saving aspects, but also the climate proofing for the future as well. So that should be really exciting on the Thursday. And again, they're free, and you can book online for those. So yeah, thank you all for tuning in today. Do keep in touch with the Retrofit 23 programme with the exhibition, where you can see the Netherfield project boards and a very nice model which shows 2 houses, one pre-retrofit and one post-retrofit. So if you can come along, the exhibition's on until the end of September. And of course, we've got the event series, of which this was a fantastic part. So thanks to all for attending and for talking today. Much appreciated. So bye, everyone.